Bill Dedman. We have today with us Bill Dedman, one of the lead reporters on Newsday undercover investigation of racial steering by real estate agents. He designed a hidden camera project called Long Island Divide, which showed agents reinforcing racial segregation through illegal steering of home buyers. The project was launched. Investigations by the state and federal authorities were several steps by the National Association of Realtors to increase awareness of fair housing issues. Today's team received several national awards for their work, including a Peabody Award. Long Island Divide is a 40-minute documentary film. Press the Divide and are online at newsday.com/divide. Bill Dedman is a Pulitzer Prize winning investigator reporter, was a #1 best-selling author of the biography Empty Mansions. He received the 1989 Pulitzer Prize in investigating reporting for his work at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution on the color of money. His series of racial discrimination by home lenders in the middle-income Black neighborhoods. He has spoken on fair housing, fair lending issues with the National Association of Realtors, the Federal Reserve, and many other financial associations. So this morning, we'd like to welcome Bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosalind. Thank you very much. I appreciate all of you being with us. It's good to have an opportunity to be back in Buffalo area. I'm excited to have an opportunity to share with you sort of a behind the scenes or inside look at our Newsday team's work on fair housing. You know, it might have been surprising to you. It was certainly surprising to me that the real estate industry responded positively to a newspaper's investigation. We don't get a lot of that. It seems that our Newsday team's testing on fair housing has sparked an important conversation in the industry and also action, with industry leaders saying these are practices that must change and change soon. You've seen the changes in New York with new state laws, more testing, new training, and we'll talk more about those. But the reach of Long Island Divided has gone national. I've presented this material to more than 100 real estate associations around the country. Let me give you a couple of examples of concrete responses. First, when the head of Realogy, it was now called Anywhere Real Estate, America's largest real estate company, which, as you know, owns Coldwell Banker and Century 21 and other brands. When that CEO says, this has shown us that we should be testing our own agents and brokers. As a company, we should be testing for steering and unequal treatment of customers. Well, then something has changed. And when NAR has embraced this idea of self-testing of agents and says, hey, we'll help make that happen, then more change is coming. The thinking seems to be in the industry, if we don't get ahead of this, if we don't police ourselves, we'll have more government investigations and we'll keep having these kinds of media investigations that are embarrassing. Besides, there's a recognition that it's the right thing to fix this and that fair housing is the law, not just in April during Fair Housing Month. My goal for this session is for it to be helpful to you, but also challenging, giving you something to think about. How can unequal treatment creep into our day-to-day work, even when we intend to be fair. We're going to look together at just a few clips of our Newsday video of real estate agents in action, admittedly, perhaps not on their best days. And we'll discuss what does each of those little video segments tell us? What can we learn from it? And we'll focus on best practices, specific steps that brokers and agents can take to treat everyone fairly. And we'll talk about some of the most difficult questions, such as what agents can say about schools. You know, I start with this perspective. I assume that all of you want to make sure that every customer who calls or emails or walks into your office is treated fairly. Rosalind, you have a question for me?
Sure. Yeah. And if the Zoom audience, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat and we will answer those. But Bill, my first question, you want to put Pulitzer Prize for investigations into mortgage lending practices. I thought it might be interesting for our viewers to hear a brief summary of the investigation and how does that investigation compare to this one?
Yes, Rosalind, there are several connections and lessons that apply. The stories in the Atlanta newspapers were called The Color of Money, and you can find them online. I'm going to show you a couple of slides here. Just a moment. Let me share that with you. I think you should see slides.
Yeah.
There's a slide of the front page of our Long Island Divided investigation and some of its reaction around the country. Now, the stories in the Atlanta paper were about a practice we call redlining, the old practice that was thought of mortgage lenders making loans only in part of their area, specifically banks and savings and loans that collected deposits throughout a metropolitan area, but made home loans only in part of that area. Now, this was way back in the late 1980s. And one thing that recurs is that whenever we do a story about this subject, people say, I'm so surprised that this is still happening. Redlining had gotten a lot of attention earlier, but it seemed to be thought of as something from the past. We found lenders in Atlanta and other major cities making home loans in white areas, even lower income white areas, but not at all in Black areas. Even the higher income Black areas of Atlanta that were home to executives from Coca-Cola and Delta Airlines. This is a crude map. Journalism students today laugh at how crude the technology was back then. But the map still tells the story. This map, these two maps show back then where Atlanta's majority Black residents, neighborhoods were, and where the banks of Atlanta rarely lent money for home loans. An important connection to the current story is that the customer would have no way to know where the banks didn't make loans. But we dug into how the banks operated. We found differences in where branches had been opened in white neighborhoods and closed in Black neighborhoods. We found differences in which real estate agents and brokers the banks marketed their services and rates to. We even found differences in which branches would accept a loan application. Now, connect that to a later story in the 2000s for the Boston Globe. It's called Speed Trap. It's online, you can find it, and I'll share the link with you in a little bit. This is about something you'd think of as quite different. It's about who gets a speeding ticket. One of the interesting things about being stopped for speeding is that in your lingo, we're all pre-qualified for the ticket, right? We were all speeding. But some people may get a break that others don't get. So this story was about that decision at the window. You've been stopped and you get a ticket or a warning. How does that decision get made? How does it break down? What we found was that in Massachusetts, when we looked at every traffic ticket and warning in the state, it was pretty easy to predict who gets a ticket and who gets a warning if you know the sex, age, and race of the driver. Women, does it surprise you that women more often got a warning for going the same speed, the same miles over in the same zone? Especially younger women were more likely to get the warning. We found in the records a college student, I talked with her, she had gotten 4 warnings in 3 weeks. Women, does it surprise you that this break for women runs out at about age 40? Now, this is not the most egregious example in the world of profiling or treating people differently in policing, but it's an example. And it seems like one that's ought to be relatively straightforward to fix. Does it surprise you that minorities more often got the ticket? Again, for going the same speed, especially Black and Latino men, especially younger Black and Latino men. Now, again, notice that the customers, we'll call the drivers customers, wouldn't know how it breaks down. Maybe even the officers wouldn't know what the pattern was. Now, I'm going to stop the slides for a moment. Taking together these 3 very different stories: redlining, traffic tickets, steering in real estate. What are the lessons? First, just some quick top-level lessons that they have in common. First, logically, the absence of complaints tells you nothing about whether your office is obeying the law. Bank customers, drivers on the highway, real estate customers have no way to know if they're being treated equally. If you get a warning, did everyone else going that speed get a warning? You have no way to know. In real estate, a fix for steering can't be to say, well, we'll respond forcefully if anyone complains, or I've been here 30 years, no one's ever complained. No one knows what listings were given to another customer, so how would they know to complain? Second lesson, diversity efforts alone will not solve these problems. Diversity in hiring and promotion of staff is useful in many ways in your business and in mine, but it's not a cure-all. People often ask, did you test only the white real estate agents? No. Were the minority real estate agents also discriminating? Yes, some of them were. And that's just as illegal. We found real estate agents of all races and backgrounds steering customers on Long Island, just as we found white and Black police officers in Boston treating minorities different from whites. We should no longer be surprised about this. Treating people differently, especially in a regulated business like yours, can be illegal, whether you're in that group or in this group. What group you're in doesn't matter at all. It might be time to stop thinking of fair housing as a diversity issue, something nice to have. We put up posters once a year, and start thinking of it as a risk reduction issue, a compliance issue, does the broker get to keep his or her license issue? Third lesson, small actions, small policies, the absence of a policy, a loose process can have a huge impact in creating or perpetuating a segregated system. For example, it seemed clear that the agents that we tested did not have a rigorous standard for what they do and don't do with every new customer, no checklist. For example, we saw customers come back from the real estate office to our newspaper office. One would have a thick folder of information about schools and services and referrals. And we'd ask the other one who had seen the same agent, where's your folder? Didn't get one. We'd check the video. They didn't get one. That seems like something you can fix. Do agents in your office have consistent ways of qualifying customers? Do you ask credit scores or income of everyone or no one? And you're aware of the new New York state law, which we'll talk about. Do you require pre-approval from every buyer? That's legal. You don't want to waste your time. You want to only show people homes who can afford homes and who are shopping in the right price range. That makes perfect sense. That's legal. Or do you require pre-approval from no one? Hey, you have a pulse. You're my buyer. I'll train you up. I'll get you in a first-time home buyer program. I'll help you get pre-approved for that mortgage. That's legal. It's in between where maybe there's a policy, but some people get a break that others don't get, or one agent in your office gives someone a break, but another agent in your office is the second half of the test and doesn't. That's how you both end up on YouTube. I'd like to show you a little introductory part of our documentary film. The project was called Long Island Divided. The film we called Testing the Divide. It's a 45-minute film, and we're just going to see about 10 minutes of it in this session. This is a short clip and a little introduction, and then you'll meet an agent. And one customer receives service from this agent, while the same agent refuses to help another customer who is in the same circumstance. Let me play that for you. It just takes a second to get it started. Okay. Are you ready? Here we go.
But you don't want to go there. It's a mixed neighborhood.
Mixed neighborhood.
If agents are courteous and professional, how can you know that they're treating you equally compared with someone of a different race or ethnicity?
I have to say it without saying it, you know.
Behind smiles and handshakes, how do you know if they're giving you fewer options or suggesting different areas?
I'm not going to send you anything in one day unless you don't want to store your car to buy your friend.
Or that rules don't apply to you and another home buyer in the same way.
Yeah, okay, I definitely need that.
Long Island is one of America's most segregated suburbs. Newsday set out to discover what role real estate agents might play in keeping it that way, potentially affecting the quality of lives.
Technically, as a real estate agent, we shouldn't tell the buyers.
In house hunting, it's nearly impossible to see evidence of hidden discrimination. You would never know unless you go undercover.
In one test, Johnny Mae Alston was the black tester and Cindy Parry was the white tester. And they met with
Anne-Marie Quealy-Bichon at Signature Premier Properties office in Cold Spring Harbor.
They asked for the same thing, As often happens, the agent discussed getting pre-qualified or pre-approved for a mortgage by a bank, showing how much a buyer can spend on a house.
You pre-qualified, I guess. My husband's working with somebody in a bank.
We've done some preliminary talks, about getting pre-approved.
Neither had been pre-approved or pre-qualified. Here's what the agent told the black tester.
So I really need that. I won't take out anyone unless you have a pre-qualification limit. So I need to. So that means I can't pre-qualify for a mortgage. Oh, so that means I can't go out to see anything. I won't do it. You can try another person, but I don't have the time.
And without pre-approval, here's what the agent told the white tester.
What is your availability? When can you start looking at houses? I would say not this coming week.
Cindy received 79 listings from this agent. Johnny May couldn't get any listings. And Cindy, the white tester, received 2 home tours. They had the same finances, the same budget, and they made the same request in the same area. But one was white, the other was black. The agent treated them differently.
So, Bill, can you tell us why did Newsday start their investigation in the beginning?
Yes, Rosalind, why is Newsday, why is the newspaper sending out testers? Let me set the scene for a moment. Many of you may be very familiar with Long Island. We're talking about a suburban area with almost 3 million people. That's about the population of Arkansas or Nevada. Long Island has a lot of diversity overall. The demographics of Long Island are quite similar to the demographics of the nation at large. There are people from all races and nationalities on Long Island, but in separate areas, largely. Minority groups, especially Black homeowners, are concentrated in very few communities. For example, out of more than 200 communities on Long Island, a majority of the Black residents live in only 8. Now, is that by choice? We had long heard from Black homebuyers who encountered problems when they tried to shop for a home outside of those few areas. It might interest you to know that Newsday 30 years ago almost did testing. There were stories in, there was a story in a journalism publication about Newsday's very public discussion and in the newsroom about whether or not to do testing. And finally decided against it because it's deceptive, sending out people posing as home buyers. And finally decided not to do it. So the steering apparently continued for 30 more years. Let me share some slides with you so you can meet some of our testers. Well, that's not what I wanted to do. Just a moment. We'll try that again. We'll get a better instructor next time. Hold on a second. Oh, well, I have to tell that slideshow to do slides, don't I? And then I can share it. There we go. Okay, here it comes. Thank you for your patience, and here we are. The main reason that we did testing was that it's really the only way to reliably tell what's happening in the market. Here you'll meet some of our, these are some of our African-American testers who had no idea. They didn't know that they were being given different neighborhoods. They didn't know that they were being shown fewer houses. They didn't know that they were being screened differently. And they certainly had no idea what the same agent was saying to the white buyers, disparaging the neighborhoods that agent was sending the black buyers to. By the way, I see here 6 of our testers. From the left, that's a university professor at Hofstra, an IRS worker, a retiree. The 2 young men are underemployed actors because New York is just lousy with them, and a nurse. Here you'll meet some of our Hispanic testers, some of our Asian American testers, and you'll meet some of our white testers in the videos. So our team decided to follow the methods used by fair housing agencies, sending out testers posing as home buyers, with the addition of hidden cameras to collect audio and video. Now, let's talk a little bit about the law on using the hidden camera for audio and video. That's legal in New York, and it's legal in most states. Most state laws say recording is legal if you're in the conversation. If one person in the conversation knows that it's being taped, you can't leave a recorder somewhere else that you're not. But if you're in the conversation, you can tape it. And that one person who knows it's being taped can be the home buyer, the tester. Hidden recording of audio is not legal in a dozen states, Pennsylvania, for example. In those 12 states, everyone in the conversation has to know that they're being recorded. But even there, we can do testing, you understand. We can monitor the text messages and emails between the tester and the agents with the tester's permission, and the voicemail messages. And most of all, we can see the listings that the agent gives to each buyer. The main reason that we did testing is that how else would we know that we're not relying on some anecdotal story of what someone thinks happened to them? We can send out people in a neutral way and actually watch to see what happens to them. It was fascinating that even our testers who were in a fair housing test, and they knew it, had no idea when they were treated differently. The testers would come back to our office telling us, that agent was so nice, she was so helpful. They only learned whether they were treated better or worse than the other person when our team brought the 2 buyers together to watch videos of how the other person was treated and to see the maps of the listings that each buyer was given. In this next video clip, you'll meet some of our testers and also hear from a fair housing expert who works with them and was one of our advisors on the project. And then you'll meet an agent, a 2nd-generation realtor in business with his parents, who had a different game plan for different customers. Let me start that for you. Okay. Are you ready?
It almost makes me wish that the racism is more explicit so that I would know about it.
Too often I hear people who maybe aren't as familiar with this kind of work say, oh, well, they were just testers. But all you have to do is tell someone, which I have to do on a fairly regular basis, that you were turned down because of your race, and tell them the circumstances that occurred on a particular test. And you will see just how real and painful that injury is.
Elmont, it's okay, it's good, you're very close to the city. Some of them are not as nice, Elmont.
I do remember him, he was nice, and I do remember him pointing out on the map.
Oh, he loved that map. I remember that.
Yeah, he had the map and he's like, you know.
Some of these towns, in my opinion, are not necessarily the greatest in terms of school districts, safety, crime, resale.
That agent with the map looked like General Patton planning the invasion of Sicily. But he had a different invasion plan for different buyers. His first question to the white buyer was, do you know Long Island? No. Do you know Hempstead, Baldwin, Freeport, Roosevelt? He's naming the communities with the largest Black population. And then he explained to her that, well, these, in my opinion, are not the greatest. And he advised her not to get off the Southern State Parkway until she had passed those communities. Notice how subtle it might be. Would you think anything if the agent said to you, well, these communities are not, maybe not the greatest? Would you think anything if the agent said to you, well, you might like Freeport? Only in comparison with what he said to the other buyer. It startled us when some agents began their presentation to the buyers. Remember, these were new customers. They had just met with guidance that violates the fair housing laws. I'm not a mind reader, but I tried to think, well, why would he be starting out there? I hate to say it, but for some agents, it seemed that steering was their best foot forward. It seemed like it was part of the service that they were selling.
Bill, can you give us a summary of the test, and was the test, what was the outcome of them?
Yes, Rosalind, here's how we went about it. The home buyers gave the agent the same circumstances. They were well trained to be absolutely the same and neutral in what they presented. It was sort of a blank slate situation. They were all first-time home buyers, so selling another property was not involved. We chose testers of the same gender and age to match up together. We dressed them in the same business casual style. I went shopping at Nordstrom and bought a shopping cart full of purses so that all the women would carry purses that were of a similar class. I told the clerk I really liked that style. They asked for the same geographic area, the same price range, the same number of bedrooms. They had the same family size, the same number of children in the public schools. And they were prepared to give the same income and credit scores if asked, but rarely was anyone asked about their finances other than what job do you do, what job does your spouse do, and are you pre-approved for a mortgage, on which they were all the same. They were not pre-approved. We shopped for houses at different price ranges. We thought we might see a difference in result at different levels of the market. So we, of course, always had the two testers matched up together, shopping in the same price range. We did tests from entry level. Now, these tests were done between 16 and 18 on Long Island. And then the stories came out at the end, very end of 2019, because it's a small newspaper. Took us a while to finish. But so they came out right before this pandemic started. On Long Island, during the period we were testing, entry level was about $400,000. There were very few single family homes below there, so we didn't go below 400. And we always made sure that there were homes for sale available in the price range we were asking for, in the area we were asking for it, on the day that we asked. And we did tests at 4, 5, 6, 7, $1 million, 3 million, 7 million. Now, $7 million is not the very top of the market. It won't get you Alec Baldwin's house out in the Hamptons on the exclusive east end of Long Island, but it would get you into his neighborhood. But then you would have Alec Baldwin for a neighbor. Now, how did we pick the agents? How did we decide whom to test? Did we test the agents we had heard were steering? We did not. We didn't pick the agents at all. We let the brokers decide which of their agents would step forward to be tested. Though the brokers didn't know they were doing the picking, we just did walk-ins. We called the brokerage. Whoever was working desk duty or whoever was on the board or whoever our tester was given to as the agent chosen by the brokerage, that was the agent we tested. And then we made sure that the second tester reached that same agent. And then we mixed up from test to test who would go first, sometimes the white buyer, sometimes the minority buyer. Notice that we did not have to have them see the same agent to do testing. Under the law, brokers, you're expected to provide the same service to two customers, even if they see different agents. Well, that would be harder, wouldn't it? We thought it would be a fairer test to see what would happen if the customers saw the same agent. So we gave the brokers a break there that the next test might not give you. We did 86 of these tests, 86 pairs. And sometimes there were more than one agent working in a team, so we saw 93 agents. 86 tests at 12 companies, 12 brands. And we chose those 12 because they're the largest in our area. Together, those 12 have more than half of the listings in our market. And they include familiar names: Coldwell Banker, Keller Williams, Century 21, Remax, etc., as well as some regional brands that are big only on Long Island. We did not feel comfortable being the referees to say who passed a test. So we had two fair housing experts review every test for equal treatment. One you met runs a fair housing program in New York City, has testified in 100 court cases, has done testing for the US Department of Justice. And the other advisor was the law professor from the University of Kentucky who writes the legal textbook on fair housing law. Only if both of our referees independently threw a flag did we call a penalty on an agent. So this was not a drive-by investigation. This was a careful effort that took our team more than 3 years. Now, the results. Let's just look at who was treated differently. Asian American buyers were treated differently than their white counterparts, that is, given different neighborhoods or screened in different ways, 19% of the time. So 2 out of 10 on average. Latino American buyers were treated differently than their white counterparts 39% of the time, 4 out of 10. And African American buyers were treated differently than whites 49% of the time in half of our test. So in answer to the question, is steering still a thing? Is it still going on? Yes. Is it hard to find? No. Most of the attention has been on that big difference between black and white customers, and that makes sense in light of historic discrimination and current events. But I'd say don't lose sight of the rest. If 4 out of 10 Hispanic buyers in our tests, or 2 out of 10 Asian buyers, were treated differently, and we're half a century down the road from passage of the Fair Housing Act, that seemed like a surprisingly high number as well. Out of 12 companies, 2 passed all their tests. One was the Corcoran Group, which you know, its former owner from the Shark Tank show. And the other was the local Sotheby's International Realty branch. They were the only ones who passed all of their tests. We did multiple tests in an office and multiple tests of the brand, and those 2 passed all of theirs. The others failed at least 1 test. So it's fair to say that most of the national and regional real estate companies that are the largest in our area were contributing to the racial segregation in our suburbs. Now, you no doubt have already asked yourself the most important question. Would the results be any different if we repeated the test this weekend in your communities? If this weekend, white and Black and Asian and Latino home buyers go shopping for homes in Buffalo, Syracuse and Rochester and areas around your home, or Christians and Muslims and Jews, or straight couples and gay couples and singles with children or without children. If they present the same criteria for their search, they're searching for the same price range in the same area, then on Monday morning in their email, will they be receiving all the same listings? That's the test. I won't ask for your answer, but just think about it for a minute. If we did 100 tests this weekend in your area, 200 testers, 100 pairs, how many of those 100 would have all the same listings in their email on Monday morning? How many would get the same? Let's discuss what sort of differences we saw. First, we just saw different amounts of service, different levels of service. For example, our white testers got 50% more, 50% more listings than their Black counterparts. We saw differences in how buyers were screened. Some of the agents refused to help our Black or Hispanic buyer unless they signed an exclusive agreement with that brokerage. They said, that's our policy. And that's legal. But the same agent did not even mention an agreement to the white buyer. Now it's illegal. And then we saw steering. For example, the agents in our tests, 1 out of 4 tests gave maps of listings that didn't even overlap. That is, in 1 out of 4 tests, they directed our minority home buyers into different communities and different school districts altogether. No overlap with the areas that they gave to the white buyer who had presented the same area and criteria for their search. And then there were inappropriate, illegal comments by agents. Making comments about the race or ethnicity or religion of people who live in an area to discourage a buyer from looking in that area. Or comments about the schools, comments about crime or resale values as a way of discouraging a buyer from looking in those areas. That's steering too, especially when the agent gives contrary information or leaves out that advice for the other buyer. It was surprising to me how many of these comments there were. And it was noticeable that minority buyers were not subjected to comments about race or racial comments or inappropriate remarks. We are long past the days of signs that say whites only. Now it's more subtle. Only the white buyers on our videos heard the inappropriate comments about race and its 3 proxies: schools, crime, and resale values. Here's a video clip which focuses on this problem of inappropriate comments. Buckle your seatbelt. This has got some strong stuff in it. Okay, here we go. Ready?
Hispanic community came in, and they really took over Springs in Northwest Woods area.
Here, an agent gives conflicting advice about Freeport.
I like Freeport. Now you have a bad school district, and and that's not good for resale value.
All the school bus, see the moms that are hanging out on the corners.
But you don't want to go there. It's a mixed neighborhood. Should be in the United Nations.
Because you might be more comfortable in a certain demographic area that isn't heavily one way or another in terms of the people.
Bayshore has 2 school districts, Brentwood and Bayshore. You don't want to have Brentwood school districts. You want to have Bayshore school district.
I can't say anything, but I encourage you, I want you to go there at 10 o'clock at night with your wife to buy diapers. Go to that 7-Eleven. They didn't buy there.
No, that's great.
I have to say it without saying it, you know, you have the knowledge of the areas,
Yes.
you know. I don't want to use the word stealing, but I try to, I use another
No,
word, I
listen,
educate in the
absolutely.
areas,
That's
you know.
Yeah. How are you, Russ? Hey, Russ. Good. How are you?
We're either waiting for the owner or waiting for the agent to show up.
You don't want to be. I don't think you should be in Elmont. I think you should probably just be Franklin Square.
And I remember specifically, he talked about steering.
Yes, that's what he said. Steering, yeah.
Yeah. And in the same breath, he mentioned, well, steering's bad, but this is what I'm going to do.
There's something called steering. No steering, you know, like steering.
Oh, like a car or something?
No, like a horse, you know.
It's like steering a horse. It seems that some agents have gotten a message through the years that complying with the fair housing laws is some sort of political correctness, that it means not saying the wrong thing or not saying the wrong thing to the wrong person who might complain about it. The comments made by the agents were so far over the line that in a way I regret showing them to you, because they sort of get all the attention, right? And we may forget that these agents crossed a legal line earlier when they gave different listings to different customers. The illegal comment is just a cherry on top. That just makes your being in federal court much higher. Perhaps we need more attention to steering and differential treatment. In other words, more attention to what agents do, not just what they say. Are they giving the same listings? Are they providing equal professional service to all their customers?
Bill, the air quotes that are so frequently used, do people think that this is legal to say if I do air quotes, then it doesn't really count?
It's possible. We'll talk a little bit after the break about motives and intent and to the extent to which that matters and whether or not the agents knew they were breaking the law. The agent that you saw, I think, talking about, I don't want to say steer, I'll say educate. And it was noticeable that she was really bragging about having steered a previous customer. She started the conversation with this customer by talking about a previous customer. She'd said, go to the 7-Eleven and see who's shopping there, and they didn't buy there. And she's sort of preening, and she's boasting that she steered a previous customer. That was very noticeable.
So, Bill, we've been talking about steering. Can you elaborate on how it showed up in the test?
Yes. Let's acknowledge that steering can take many forms. It's sort of a layman's term that's like a catch-all term used for a lot of different behaviors. It's the behavior that may be illegal. And it can take a lot of different forms. We've been discussing this in terms of individual buyers, but let's flip the coin over for a moment and let's talk about sellers. Let's look at it neighborhood by neighborhood. Both of our testers would ask for an area, right? Within a 45-minute commute to Penn Station, or within 20 minutes of this community or 30 minutes of Levittown. Well, that creates a circle around Levittown, right? A commuting circle. And that circle may include many communities and school districts, and they may vary in race or ethnicity or religion or other characteristics. And then sometimes we would see that in about 40% of our tests, we would see that in the wider residential parts of that circle, the listings would be given only to our white buyer. Well, we all understand in those cases, that means minorities are being steered around those communities. They're not being given those listings. And that's what we were testing for. We also saw something else that we didn't expect, and this has to do with sellers. And I suspect that this has not gotten enough attention in brokerages. Not enough of the response has focused on this issue. So I mentioned it also because I understand that this is an area where new lawsuits under the Fair Housing Act are likely to occur. We had minority communities or communities with noticeable minority population, even if they weren't majority minority, where nobody got the listings. These minority areas are within the circle given by both testers. There are homes for sale on that day in that price range. But the agents didn't send those listings to either buyer. These were the communities with more than a modest amount of Black population on Long Island. And the agents ignored those, skipped over them, leapfrogged them, went around them for everybody. Well, that's steering too. The agents in our test had more than 200 opportunities to share listings in one of the 8 largely Black and Hispanic communities on Long Island. More than 200 chances at the wheel. And they gave listings in one of those communities only 15 times. Notice that we were the easiest graders ever. We passed everybody who treated the two buyers the same, even if they steered both buyers around all the minority areas. We still passed them, but it's still steering. Have you ever heard an agent say, oh, there are areas where I won't look. There are areas where I won't send you. There's streets or neighborhoods that I won't go to. This is a dangerous practice. Now, our legal expert said, wait a minute, who's the plaintiff in that case? It's a very long list. Not only are both home buyers being harmed, remember, both the minority and white home buyers are being harmed under the law by not being given full access to available homes in integrated areas. But also the communities themselves are being harmed, the governments, the schools. And here's where you may see new lawsuits in the next few years. Also harmed is anyone who's trying to sell a home in those areas and their listing broker. And you understand why. All of those may have a lawsuit under the Fair Housing Act against the brokerages that are routinely steering buyers around their communities. Fewer buyers means what? Slower sales, lower prices, lower commissions, lower home values, less home equity, less money for a homeowner's retirement, less money to send the grandkids to college, and less tax money for schools and parks and libraries. So steering is not some political correctness, the fair housing laws. The steering is not like going 2 miles an hour over on the highway. It has real harm that it causes to individuals and to communities. Now, here's a video clip with a classic example of steering, directing buyers to areas that match the buyer's race. The question is, mentioning high crime rates is steering? Yes, if you're saying it to discourage someone from going to an area. Yes, it is steering, especially when that advice is given to one person, but not the other. We'll see you in federal court. Here's an example. An agent tells one family, this is a man shopping for himself, his wife, and their teenager in the public schools, tells them that a community is an excellent place to live. It has the nicest neighbors. She's always glad when she can do business there. While the same agent warns another family, that's a man shopping for himself, his wife, and their teenager in the public schools, warns them that the same community is a dangerous place. Let me play that for you. Okay, we're waiting for it to come around on the guitar here. Are you ready?
Kelvin Toon is a black man in his early 50s, and he went in to meet with an agent involving a test in the Brentwood community, a community that is 80% Hispanic and black. The agent communicated to Kelvin, our black tester, that she enjoyed meeting with clients from the Brentwood area.
Every time I get a new listing in Brentwood or a new client, I get so excited because they're the nicest people.
When we sent Kelvin's counterpart in to meet with the same agent, the white tester was actually warned about Brentwood not being a nice place.
The nursing home we need to be near is in Brentwood.
Okay.
And so we found a couple that are in Brentwood.
Pretty close to each other.
Okay. And it just seemed like those would be handy also for going
Do you want to
visit.
give me them and I'll look into them for you? Or?
Yeah, I can do that.
That warning came later to the white testers saying there was concern about gang activity going on in Brentwood. This agent wanted the white tester to know, but that information wasn't provided to Kelvin, the black tester. The listings centered black tester Kelvin in Brentwood with 27 house listings, while the white tester got 0 listings in Brentwood and was directed towards much whiter neighborhoods.
Let's think for a moment about the point where that agent went astray. Again, the text message about the gang activity, about crime, that gets all of our attention. But focus for a moment earlier on the listings. Remember, both families were asking about the same area. They both wanted an area that had Brentwood at its center. Well, one of them, his wife worked in Brentwood, and the other one, you heard the nursing home. His mother-in-law was in a nursing home in Brentwood. They both needed to be within 20 minutes of Brentwood. The agent sent listings in Brentwood to the black family. But for the white family, she ignored Brentwood entirely, leapfrogged over it to whiter areas. So we threw her a life preserver. What you were watching there was the white buyer on the porch at a home tour of one of the listings she had sent him. That's outside of Brentwood. And he's on the porch and he says, hey, we printed out from online. He's been on Zillow. He printed out some listings of homes. He says, hey, these are closer to the nursing home. These are closer to where we're looking for homes. And she says, oh, well, I'll look into those for you. So we've thrown her a life preserver, and has she grabbed it? It seemed as though she had. Good for her. But then she sent the comment about crime in Brentwood. And did she show him? Did she arrange showings at any of the listings that he brought in? No, she did not. We're going to take a break for 10 minutes. I'd like you to think on the break about why. I think the why question, the answer is may not be what you think it must be. But think what are your answers? Maybe write down a few of the possibilities. Why didn't she give both families all the listings that met their criteria in the same area that they had both asked for? Why is what we found happening? Think about that. I have 10 o'clock and a few seconds after. At exactly 10:10, we're going to resume. You have 10-minute break, and we're going to resume at 10 after. Okay?
People on Zoom, please don't log off. Just
No.
unmute yourself, take your video off, but don't log off. The class is blocked.
Yeah, stay where you are. You can turn off your camera if you like.
Oh, yeah.
You can mute yourself if you're going to do anything embarrassing.
Still drinking it, yeah. Oh,
Got another minute. It's not big gun, so people.
Oh,
Really? Really? So that's.
We have to sign out.
It won't be for.
Rosalind, whenever you get ready, I'm ready. Or if you want to give people a few more seconds.
So we all need to.
We're ready to get started.
Come back soon, people.
The question is it legal to expose the agents on camera? Yes, as we mentioned earlier, making hidden camera videos or audio in New York is legal, as it is legal in most states. And then publishing those videos is legal as well. That's why we were able to do it. That's why you can see these on YouTube.
So one other question, Bill, and welcome back, everyone. Do you think the agents included in the documentary actually knowingly what they knowingly steering? And some agents may believe if steering was unconscious or intentional, that it would raise to a violation. Would it raise to a level of violation if they didn't realize they were steering?
Yes, this is a question about intent. And I ask you to think about why might this be happening? Now, there were occasions where agents did say out loud, I shouldn't be saying this, but I guess that's everybody make sure that your camera is muted. Some agents would say, well, I shouldn't be saying this. And I guess that's the real estate equivalent of, hey, buddy, would you hold my beer? Get your camera, something is about to happen. But the main point to keep in mind is that under the law, it doesn't matter at all if the differential treatment is intentional or not. Oh, I was just trying to help is not an excuse. The Fair Housing Act and state laws cover behavior, not thoughts or motives. This isn't a criminal law where somebody has to prove your motive, your intent. No, this is a civil law. The law is not a mind reader. It's the effect of your action, not your intent, that matters. If a real estate agent is treating one person better than another similarly situated person, and the difference between them is one of the 7 categories in the Fair Housing Act, or additional categories in state or local law, then the agent and the agent's broker have violated the law. Let me remind you of what those categories are in the laws. First, let's look at the federal Fair Housing Act. These are the protected classes of people under federal law: race, color, sex, religion, national origin, disability, and family status. We usually mean family status to mean having children or not having children. A couple of points of clarification. The law says sex. The federal courts have said that means not just male or female, but it means any kind of gender identity selection that somebody's made, or also sexual orientation. All of that's covered under the word sex. two questions for you. First, which groups do these categories protect? For example, religion. Which religions are protected? Well, all of them. Everybody is in some religion or has no religion and is therefore protected on the religious line. To think of it another way, all of us are protected by all 7 of these categories. Race doesn't just protect minority groups, it protects everybody. Everybody in this session is on all 7 of those lines and is protected by federal law against discrimination, which advantages or disadvantages people who are one way or another on any of those 7 lines. Next question for you. Which of these gets all the attention? Which of these is 80% of the cases brought before HUD? It gets all the action in court. It's not race or color. It's disability. Think about why that is. It's because you can take a picture of disability. You have a wheelchair and you know you're in a wheelchair, you can take a picture of it. And your landlord isn't giving you a reasonable accommodation as required by the law, say a parking space near the building. And you can take a video of that. Your wheelchair either fits through the door or it doesn't. You know you're being discriminated against and you know you can prove it. So you make a complaint. There are very few complaints in the other areas because even if you suspected you were being treated differently, you would have no way to prove it because nobody knows what listings are given or screening is given with people of another race or another national origin, etc. Okay, so we're talking about the federal categories. Let me show you the state categories in New York State that are on top of the national categories. Age discrimination is prohibited except for the exception of allowing some elder-only communities. Lawful source of income, that is, you can, if somebody's they're convicted of being a drug dealer, you cannot rent to them. But as long as their income is lawful, it's not anybody's business what their source of income is. They inherited it. They are on public assistance. None of this matters. What matters is can they afford to pay? Why is domestic violence victim on the list? Why would domestic violence victims have been discriminated against in housing and need protection? They call the police. And some landlords would take presence of police as evidence that you're a bad tenant. So if you called the police to report that you were being abused in your home, you might get put out of your home by the landlord. So that group needed protection. Creed is a word we don't use very often anymore, but it's close to religion. It's a set of religious beliefs or beliefs, whether they're religious or not. Notice that marital status is on the state list. That's a little different from family status, right? Just being married or not. I think the rest are pretty self-explanatory. Now, local areas can add additional. Here, for example, is Erie County, source of income, which now duplicates the state law, and immigration or citizenship status. Maybe partly because you're close to a border, I don't know. Buffalo added use of a therapy dog or cat. Be interested to know how that and only that ended up in your city of Buffalo laws. For comparison, on Long Island, Nassau County had a prohibition specifically about sex and sexual orientation. Suffolk County added alienage having to do with whether you were a native here or not, and citizenship and veteran status. Here are the protected classes in New York City. I could have headlined this slide, protected classes that Buffalo has chosen not to add, but I maybe that would be too much on the nose. So I didn't go that far. Okay. We're going to talk about impacts in a minute, but one of the things that happened was that the state attorney general investigated, and there were some small settlements. In this case, $115,000 is the commission on a handful of houses on Long Island. Now, those are the categories. Now, I said in answer to your question that intent didn't matter. And although it doesn't matter under the law, it is interesting and important for us to speculate a little bit about why might steering happen. If you want to stop something from happening, you have to think about why it might be happening. So let's talk about that a little bit. We all understand that people could intend to discriminate and that people could discriminate without intending to. Our scientists use the term sometimes implicit bias or unconscious bias. And what they're really talking about is some sort of automatic process allows stereotype to come into play even before we think about it. I guess another way to think of it is that by whatever name, they're saying that even people who intend to be fair can act in unfair ways. And we all understand that we've seen in our lives, people may be treated differently for lots of reasons. Their appearance, their skin color, their hairstyle, their accent, their tattoos, their clothes, even their names. And some of those are protected classes or are markers of a protected class. There are ways that one could discriminate which are not protected by law. For example, New York Jets fans, you can discriminate against Jets fans all you want. That is not a protected class with good reason. Now, let me give you an example from our study that struck my ear as an implicit bias. That is an unintentional difference. And I think it's important because you're in an affinity business, right? I see that that you're from Skinny Atlas. That's where my cousin's second wife is from, and I'm obviously your agent. We have this connection. You make connections with customers. Well, we saw our agents that we tested making connections with the white buyers that they didn't make with the minority buyers. Here's one example. The agents in our tests were far more likely to give information about themselves to white buyers. The agents were more likely to say, oh, you're looking in Northport. I have kids in the Northport school, or I used to live in Northport. Far more likely to give that kind of endorsement of an area and that information about themselves when the buyers were white, and less likely to say any of that when the buyers were minorities. It became just sort of a running joke in the office. Nobody failed a test because of this. We didn't flunk anybody for this, but one of our buyers kept being offered babysitting. She was white. Some of the agents would say to her, oh, you're looking in Northport. Well, I have a friend and she could babysit for your kids if you bought in Northport. But the minority buyer, they knew, also had kids and was also shopping in Northport. And the same agent wouldn't even tell her that they lived in or knew anybody in Northport. That can't be a plan. That's not an office policy or plan. That's having a greater affinity with some people than others. And that's, to me, an example of why they urge us to be aware of the possibility of that sort of unconscious bias. Now, let's think about other possible explanations. Just logically, what else is on the table that could explain the different treatment that we saw. Okay. It appeared that some of the real estate agents may be profiling, that is, assuming based on outward characteristics, assuming, say, that the minority buyer can't really afford the home in the price range they've given, or might not qualify for the mortgage and should be screened differently, while accepting the same information without question from the white buyer. One of the interesting things about profiling is that it doesn't work. Experts in many fields, counterterrorism, law enforcement, they keep trying to tell us, you know, it makes us less safe to profile. Here's what they mean. Let's say you want to stop school shootings from happening. Maybe you've gotten an idea that kids who play violent video games are more likely to be school, or those who dress a certain way, or maybe they're in a certain kind of home, or they have mental health issues. The US Secret Service studied all the school shootings in America and said, no, there's no profile of that sort at all. There's no type of person more likely to do. Kids from good homes, kids from bad, kids with mental health issues and without. Violent video games, clothing, none of those helps predict. And therefore, they would distract investigators and school administrators. In other words, paying attention to that means that you're paying attention to too many good kids are caught up in that, and maybe not the kid who's planning an attack. Makes us less safe. Well, what's a better predictor? Actual behaviors related to school shootings. Acquiring weapons, having grievances at school, warning your fellow students, watch out, don't be in the cafeteria on Thursday. Almost all school shootings involve that kind of warning. You see the difference between types of person and actual behaviors related to the activity we're trying to focus on. Well, you're in a commission business, right? So profiling makes us less safe. Profiling in real estate means you leave money on the table if you assume that this buyer can't really be a buyer or not at the price range they've given based on their appearance, right? What are the other possible explanations? Some agents might think, consciously or not, that it's just a shortcut, that they'll make money faster if they show people homes where you'll feel comfortable. Did you notice there was an agent in a coffee shop? It was noisy, but she was saying to the buyer, you might feel more comfortable looking in an area where there's not people of a heavily one demographic or another. She sent this white buyer only the white area, and she sent the minority buyer a minority area. Think about that assumption. She just met this person. They're in the coffee. It's their first meeting. She's known him for 2 minutes. Why assume, because he's white, that he doesn't want to live in an integrated area? Why assume that he's not already married to someone who's a different race or religion or background? It's not a very reasonable assumption. Besides, maybe we mentioned steering is illegal. One issue we have to talk about is that agents could fear that appraisers or lenders may be biased, making it harder to close a sale, to qualify for the mortgage, to have the deal come through. There is a lot of evidence going back for decades and right up to this year of bias in appraisal and in lending. Berkshire Hathaway just settled very expensively a large lawsuit in Pennsylvania for its mortgage unit for redlining. Redlining is not just something from the past. And there's a lot of focus now on appraisal bias. You've seen perhaps the large study by Freddie Mac looking at a great number of mortgages and raising questions. Why are these differences in the way black and white neighborhoods are being treated not explained in the file? There's nothing in the file to substantiate this. Why for black appraisals are the comps so often not the nearest comparable neighborhood, but a Black neighborhood across town? Why is that? And you may have seen the spectacular examples of the Black family refinancing their home. They think their appraisal's low, so they get a second appraisal. And they take down all the pictures of the Black relatives, and they get a fellow professor at the university who's white to come over and meet the appraiser, and their appraisal goes up $400,000. Well, that's a lawsuit now. It's an anecdote, but combined with the studies, these have put a lot of attention on appraisal bias. If you search for HUD and appraisal bias, you'll find a lot of information out from the federal government working with the appraisal industry, working with NAR and the Justice Department to look into this area. I think you'll see some more changes in that area. But still, the Fair Housing Act applies to you. Anticipating bias by others is not a justification under the law for treating people differently. I think there's a final logical explanation for steering. That is, there's only one more explanation I can think of, but I don't think it fits. A few agents may be doing it on purpose out of some bigotry, but I just assume that's not really the common situation. There was no evidence that we were seeing of outright bigoted statements. People talked about schools and crime and resale value, but they talked about them with the white buyers and not with the minority buyers. We don't know what's in their heart, but it does appear that there's so much steering going on that it can't be accounted for by only bad people doing it. Good people have to be doing it too. Rosalind, you have a question for me?
I do have a question for you.
Okay, good.
What role do you think school plays in the actions of
Schools? Well, our agents would tell our buyers everything is decided by schools. Whether you have kids or not, resale values are affected by schools, so everything's affected by schools. They would tout one district over another. This one's blue ribbon and that one's declining. And then they would give different information or be silent on that with the other buyer. A bit of context is important. American schools vary by race and other characteristics of the students. And therefore, under the law, directing someone to a certain school and not to another school is the same as directing them to an area with a higher or lower minority population, whether you mention race, whether you say I wasn't thinking about race at all, then none of that matters. A bit of context. America's schools are more segregated now than they were in 1968, the year Congress passed the Fair Housing Act. And of course, school segregation and housing segregation are intertwined because most of the country has school districts where you buy a house determines your school. Our legal advisors were clear on this. Agents can answer factual questions about schools. You know, the football team just won the championship. The band was in the Macy's parade. They just built a new language lab. The legal problem arises when agents are picking or choosing different districts for different customers, or making assumptions about which schools are good, or making comments about school test scores or demographics as a way to steer customers, or sometimes just the white customers, away from certain districts. Here's a discussion of schools from our video, and you'll meet the law professor from Kentucky who was one of the advisors on our project. Here we go. Okay. Here we go.
teacher. I said, do you really want your future children going to Amityville School District?
We're gonna try and stay away from Freeport, Roosevelt, Hempstead for now because of the school district.
This part, the Salisbury part, is in demand because the schools are much, much, much better.
In Newsday's 86-pair test, agents often applied a laser-like focus on school districts, highlighting their perceived quality when recommending places that house hunters should consider buying or avoid. Fair housing experts say touting or disparaging school districts can put agents in jeopardy because talking about school districts can be taken as a euphemism for race.
There's a few districts that I know I would I won't look in those towns.
Oh, okay.
You know, like Freeport and Baldwin and Amityville, which is part of Massapequa schools, but it's just certain parts of Massapequa.
If the customer asked about the quality of the schools and the agent responded with accurate information, I think the agent would be fine. The problem with talking about differentials in schools is that at least in the last 10 or 15 years, that has been a proxy for race. They don't mention the race of the community. Good schools are available in these areas. Those areas I'd stay away from because they have poor schools. I want to ask, did you tell that to the other tester? If you're only giving that information to one tester of the two, and the only difference is the race, then you've provided what I call differential service.
If you're in Massapequa, you only want school district 23.
Okay.
You don't want 6 in Massapequa because that takes in Amityville, and you're not going to like those schools.
Notice that substituting her judgment for the customer's judgment. You're not going to like those schools. The clear advice from NAR and our legal experts is to limit your information to answering factual questions or refer the customers to factual information from the state education department. Tell them to do their own homework. But stay away from the trap of using or responding to opinions such as good schools or nice schools. NAR keeps trying to warn its members, realtors are not experts in schools. Why not? Well, first of all, different people want different things in a school. And second, if you're judging which schools are good, much of your judgment is going to be based on school test scores. Write this on the blackboard 100 times. School test scores don't tell you how good a school is. School test scores tell you mostly how affluent are the parents who send their kids to that school. In America, education and wealth of parents is a pretty good predictor of their children's test scores. And in America, race is a pretty good predictor of the parents' education and wealth. So you see the problem. A so-called high-performing school may just be the one with wealthier, better educated parents. Those National Merit Scholars came into the 3rd grade as National Merit Scholars. But we think of it as, oh, that's a good school. Steering parents around schools with lower test scores, especially just steering the white parents around them, perpetuates segregation based on race. That's why it's illegal. It's more public spirited, and it helps you stay within the law. Just tell parents to do their homework. It's okay to say to parents, you know, any agent should give you the same answer. We're not picking your schools for you. You have to pick the schools. We have fair housing laws, and for very good reason. It's okay to say to parents, if schools are important to you, talk with other parents. Go see the principal. Go see the instructors in the areas that are important to you. You know, if they were buying a boat, if boats were important to them, they'd do their homework. They'd go look at boats.
Bill, what was the reaction from the real estate industry and the government?
The reaction. Well, I'll go through this rather quickly. I mean, you're well aware that caused something of a kerfuffle in New York State and around the country. Most of the agents, I see the questions about what happened to the agent. Most of the agents are still practicing. Some of them gave up their licenses or retired rather than go through a disciplinary process. The Long Island Board of Realtors started a disciplinary action against every broker and agent who had failed a test. So did the state of New York. There were a couple, they thought, well, that's a close call, and the state didn't start proceedings, but in almost every case they did. And they started proceedings against trainers in fair housing classes that were not focusing on fair housing and didn't teach about steering. We know that some agents won their cases and kept their licenses. The state didn't do any investigating. It didn't bring in the testers. It didn't bring in the listings. And the hearings officer said, well, I can't take a person's license away if you don't bring me the evidence. And that seems reasonable. So some of them won their hearings, and we'll see if there are different results if the state does more investigating as the hearings are still going on. We did see all of the agents testify in a state Senate hearing. You could watch it on YouTube. They were all subpoenaed. They all appeared. The agent who said to follow the school bus and see which moms are waiting to meet the bus and you'll know if you want to buy. She said, I just wanted the buyers to know where the bus routes were. The brokers, it was interesting that the brokers all said, well, we have reviewed the videos and we've studied this and nobody did anything wrong. That was the position of the brokers who testified. But the state legislature knew better. And with support of the New York State Association of Realtors, you're aware that there have been changes in state law. Let me share those changes in law with you just quickly. Let's see. I'm going to get back to that in a minute because we want to be here. The changes start with testing. The legislature recognized that there need to be cops on the highway, and not the real estate department, not the Department of State that licenses you, but the Attorney General's office is doing that testing. And who's paying for it? You are. $30 on a broker's license renewal, $10 for a salesperson. They also clarified that an associate broker who's an office manager has the same responsibility as a broker to supervise agents. You're aware of new procedures requiring every website of every agent and broker in the state to show at the top of the page the answer to these three questions. Any answer is okay, but you have to state your answer and apply it the same to everybody. Do buyers have to show ID, sign an agreement, have a mortgage pre-approval? There's some forms given to customers, but you're well aware that customers would have no way to know they're being steered. I don't see the value of those forms, but they're not hurting anything, or the notices that are displayed in the offices. And additional training and additional fines. Nationally, you're aware that the National Association of Realtors has come out with new training, especially Fairhaven. I hope most of you have taken the Fairhaven class. Associations have recommended that you take it. It's about an hour, and it's really a video game. It's a simulation where you play the agent and you play the broker, the buyer, and fair housing issues come up. NAR created Fairhaven because it was shocked by the statements in the video showing that the agents on Long Island knew the law. I shouldn't be saying this, but I don't want to say steer, but. And they realized that knowing the law was not the only thing that we need. New York already had the highest continuing ed requirement for fair housing of any state before our testing was done. What NAR's leadership decided was, you know, what we need is not just knowledge of the law, we need empathy. And Fairhaven is an empathy machine. When you're playing the buyer and these issues come up, you're seeing the impact on buyers. That's why it was created that way. Some associations, including the Long Island Board of Realtors, now requires Fairhaven completion as part of its new member orientation. It requires it for anyone who wants to serve on a committee or in office or be a national rep. And there are other associations doing the same. So that's something that you might consider. I think the other long-standing reaction to this is that it has shown fair housing associations, the kind of places that do testing, that they need to not just do testing in rentals, which they've done mostly. They need to do the harder testing of sales. And it's shown HUD that it needs to fund more testing by fair housing groups. And it's shown companies that it would be smarter for them to do testing of their own agents. And NAR, as I said, is helping set that up for companies. If the companies on Long Island had already been testing themselves, then they would have known about this before they received the certified letter from Newsday inviting them to come in and watch videos of their agents in action. All right, I'm going to step back a moment, and I want to talk just for a few minutes about some best practices, some specific suggestions from NAR and fair housing attorneys that would help keep you out of federal court, off of YouTube, and in compliance with the law. I'm not an attorney. I'm passing on advice from NAR and fair housing attorneys. Every customer should receive the same behavior from you. Remember, you may be on video. The first half of the test may already have been conducted with another agent. You're the second half. At an open house, if you greet people warmly, if you offer someone who comes to your office a soft drink, offer it to everybody. Be as hospitable with everyone. If you follow up with someone, follow up with everyone with the same enthusiasm and information. Checklists are very helpful to make sure that you follow a standard procedure for everyone. You know, I'm thinking checklists strike the ear as sort of remedial, like something beginners would do. But no, we've learned that the more important an activity is, the more you need a checklist. Surgeons use checklists. Got to remember to take those sponges out of the patient. If you're an airplane pilot and you're having a bad day, you're distracted, things are not good at home, and your mind is elsewhere, you will have a better day if the checklist reminds you to put down the landing gear. In real estate, a checklist can help you make sure to get the same information from every customer, every buyer, every seller, to provide them the same referrals, the same information, and the same handouts, and the same advice. Everybody should leave with the same information. Similarly, you can practice answers to difficult questions such as, which are the good schools? Well, the right answer is you need to do your own homework. You'll get all the listings, and when you pick a school district, you'll get fewer listings. It's useful, I think, in Fairhaven to sort of work that into muscle memory. And also it might be useful to pass the microphone around in a company meeting, and watching people answer that clumsily or well, I think can be helpful to everybody. Similarly, you can use templates or drafts for emails and text messages. Think of course, of all the different steps in the buying and selling process, and you provide information all the time. Well, you may already do this. Copies of all the texts and emails that are edited to send to the right person may help keep a consistent record that you're providing the same information to everybody. Talk about the property, not about the people. Identify the objective criteria of what the buyer wants and tell them about the property. You understand the difference between go learn the neighborhood, spend time in the neighborhood, and see which moms are waiting to meet the school bus, and then you'll know if you want to buy in that area. You recognize the difference between those two bits of advice. Stick to factual information, not opinion. The reputation of a community is not a fact. Safe is not a fact. Good schools is not a fact. These are opinions. Refer customers to primary sources of information. If they ask you about crime rates, tell them to go talk to the police departments, look up crime rates online. If they then choose a particular community, you'll give them just those listings. If they want to know about schools, tell them to go do their homework at the schools. Remember, you may be the first or second half of a test. You don't just need consistency in the information you give all your customers or clients. You and your colleagues need consistency in how you treat people. Qualify customers, screen customers in the same way as New York law now requires in 3 areas. Give all the listings that fit their objective criteria. I think this is the most important. We watched 400 hours of video, watched these tests conducted, and we kept thinking, well, what if they stop steering? They already know, the realtors on Long Island were suspicious that the state was already doing testing. They already knew there was testing. What if they heard Newsday was testing? Well, could they stop steering? You know, that would be horrible if we hadn't finished our story yet, right? Well, we were discussing, could they stop? Well, it was clear in watching the videos that the easiest way to stop steering would be to give everybody all the listings that fit what they had actually asked for. Don't substitute your judgment for theirs. When the customer has no idea what they want, what should they get? All the listings. When they add criteria, a corner I don't want a corner. I need the main bedroom on the first level. Oh, it needs to be a 2-car garage, or I've picked a particular school district, then they get fewer listings. Educate buyers and especially owners and landlords about the fair housing laws. You can complete your At Home with Diversity certification and the Fair Haven simulation. You can tell owners about the fair housing laws and that you'll comply with them, as any agent should, before the owner or the landlord might press you into a fair housing violation. Before an owner might say, don't bring any of those people to the neighborhood, or I don't want any tenants with children. This will happen, right? You will encounter owners or landlords who will press you to commit a violation. And what's your legal obligation there? I know you have an obligation of fidelity to your client, but at that point, that obligation ends if they're pressing you to violate the law, and you can tell them you'll need to get another agent. You've seen discussion about love letters. And the reason this conversation in the industry has been going on, these letters from buyer to seller that say, please pick me in a competitive market, is that these letters reveal information about protected classes and therefore tempt the seller and the seller's agent into committing a fair housing violation by choosing buyers who look like the sellers, who will use the playset because they have kids the same age, who will celebrate the same holidays in the home. I understand you could write a love letter. Let's imagine a letter from buyer to seller that it discloses no information in its photos or text about the buyer's family or race or religion or national origin or ancestry or age or veteran status or other protected classes. Have you ever seen such a letter? No. The advice, by the way, is to tell buyers and sellers this up front. Talk to your attorney, talk about what you can do, but the standard advice is put this in your agreement with the seller. Tell them before the letters come in that if any letters come in, you're not passing them on. Get that clarified at the beginning. Present offers, especially in a multiple offer situation, with the finances and the terms only. You don't have to tell the name of the buyer. Buyer number 1, buyer number 2, buyer number 3, here's what they're offering, here's when it would close, here's how it's financed, etc. Because names disclose information about race, about nationality, and other protected classes. NAR has a form for all this. It's called the Equal Service Report. It's in the broker's manual. And it's a way for agents to record what did the person ask for and what did we give them? What communities did they ask for? What were their criteria of their search? What communities and school districts did we send? It's a way for the brokers to monitor whether two different agents might be treating two different people who are similarly situated the same or differently. Now, I have a final word for you from our law professor who was an advisor on this project. This is the shortest video we'll show you, and it's just less than a minute. And but watch out, he really steps up to the plate here. I think he makes a good point, and then maybe he goes a little too far. See what you think. Here's our law professor from the University of Kentucky who writes the legal textbook on fair housing law. You ready?
I'm a law professor at the University of Kentucky, and I've been a law professor for a long number of years. All we're asking in these tests, you get two people who come in and ask for exactly the same thing. Why don't you give them the same listing? Why don't you pre-qualify them in exactly the same way? It's not that big a burden. This is a law. This should be treated like a tax law or any other law. You have to obey this law, and particularly if you're in a licensed business like real estate agents, if you can't obey the law, you ought to just get out.
Now, I told you he was going to step up and take a swing, but I think the complexity in what he's saying is this, though. I assume that all of you want to obey the law. Wanting to obey the law may not be the missing ingredient here. What might be missing is a recognition how even fair-minded people who are well-intentioned may not understand how their actions could advantage or disadvantage one person or another and be illegal. That's might be the missing ingredient. I urge you to share our film and our stories with your colleagues and your customers. The address, which we'll put up again in a minute, is simply newsday.com/divided. Have a movie night, talk about it. But you see, don't have a discussion in your office about, well, who's the bigot in our office? This is not productive. And it doesn't actually get at the problem. It might be more helpful to have more of an engineering question, more of a how does it work discussion. How do things work in our office? Or to put it this way, how can the broker in our office whose license is on the line be confident that every agent will treat similar customers the same? How are we being fair to sellers in different neighborhoods, which is the first obligation in the Fair Housing Act? How can we have confidence in that? How will our actions appear if they appear on video? If testers are writing down, if we make a map of all the listings that we give different people and we lay those maps over census data, how will that appear in federal court? That's the right conversation to have. Now, we're going to deal with some of your questions, and I see several questions in the chat. I'm going to take those as quickly as I can, okay? Is it considered steering if the client wants a particular area? No, not if the client puts forward a particular area. The example that's often given is Orthodox Jews who need to walk to temple on Saturday. They can't drive to temple. Well, the advice usually given is this. If a person says, well, I need to be able to walk to temple on Saturday, don't make the judgment yourself. You say to them, well, I don't know which temple you'd prefer, and I don't know how far you can walk on a Saturday with your family. You need to tell me that. You see, back to them. You need to say, you draw me a map. You pick a temple, you research them, you pick a walking radius, and I'll send you just listings that meet your criteria within that area. Similarly, if somebody says, well, I want the area with the best resale value, you could provide them information about resales in all areas if you know it. You can encourage them to go do their own homework if you don't know it and they need to look it up. But then once they've chosen an area, then you'll send them listings in that area. You see how that's a better process, because otherwise the broker has to rely that you're going to make that same judgment for two different people, or that two different agents would make that same judgment, irrespective of race or other characteristics, for two different people. That's not giving the broker very much confidence, is it? Let the customer choose the areas is the best example, advice. The question is asked, how do we follow up, or what responses do we give to buyers who ask, I want a good school, I want a good neighborhood? And I know buyers ask you about that. Notice that our buyers didn't ask that in our test. We were blank slates. Are you interested in school? They would say yes. And they would say, my kid's in the 5th grade and we're going to go to the public schools. So yes, we're interested in schools. But they didn't come in saying, I want to know about the good schools. But I know some of your buyers will do that. The clear advice from our legal experts is to tell them to do their own homework. I also think that it's useful to explain to them that much of that homework, much of those ratings, like great schools, are founded mostly on school test scores. It's not bad to advise them. By the way, did you know school test scores don't tell you which schools are good? Most people are completely unaware of that. Anybody who's researched education data is well aware that the best predictor of a kid's school test scores all the way through college is the mother's education level, which is closely connected with race and income in America. But most people don't know that. So they think those school ratings are meaningful. You can advise them about that. Looking for other questions that are not answered, feel free to shout out one, Doreen or Rosalind, if you see one. I'm looking at your questions that were sent to me.
Was there any action taken against the agent?
Yes, well, a few lost their licenses. A few gave up the business. I know of one who changed her name, and this will happen. I thought it was interesting that some won their cases because the state didn't investigate. But you know, I think it's fine. I always viewed it as we weren't testing the agents, we were testing the companies, we were testing the brands. And you know, if a fair housing group was focusing on a particular agent, which they rarely do, they would do multiple tests. They would send in multiple pairs before they would take an agent to federal court. So it never bothered me that some agents didn't lose their license. And I thought that their experience was instructive for everybody, and that there were lessons to be learned for the companies.
Hey, Bill?
Yes.
Real quick. Now that it's been over 3 years, is there a thought of retesting again to see if any change has actually occurred?
You have to understand how expensive this testing was for a small newspaper, Newsday. I don't think there's been any discussion of retesting, but there is already testing being done by the state and by fair housing groups. And so will there be testing on Long Island? Yes. But will there be testing elsewhere throughout the state and the nation? Yes. That seems, I mean, if I had $1 million to spend one way or another, I might test in Buffalo, right? We already tested in Long Island. One change I think you'll see is that HUD has done testing for a long time, but never named names. They would just say in San Antonio, people failed 42% of our tests or something, which without the shaming, it has no effect, right? You have to name names. And that was a very important decision that Newsday made early on, is we're going to take the cameras out. That way we'll know the tests are done fairly. And that way everybody will know there's no out of context. You can watch the entire interaction between these agents and our testers on Newsday's website. it's all there so that you don't have any out of context. And we name names. The logos of the brokerages are in the videos. I think that was a very key decision that was made by Newsday. If there are other questions, I'll be glad to try to address them.
Bill, we're gonna wrap it up, but
Very good.
for those on Zoom and everyone who has questions, we'll definitely get you answers to those questions. We really appreciate you, those who are here, and thank you for your time.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you all very much.